As it turned out, we did, in fact, have an immediate problem with which the humans could help. Early in the invasion of our home system, our final colony of Verxis II had served as our first line of defense of our home system. Our last remaining warships had been drawn up in a defensive posture, facing the incoming threat, but they were the dregs of what we once had been able to muster. System defense boats, aging fleet escorts, and even an ancient battle cruiser which has been serving out its retirement as a museum. Likewise, the orbital platforms were a long way past their prime. They consisted mainly of the mothballed network which had originally served Verxis Prime some 2 centuries prior to the crisis. Our Voidsmen and Marines held the line, resolved to sell their lives dearly. Resolve counted little in the massacre that was to come. The Talankari had not even deigned to bring their full strength to bear. A pair of battleships, a carrier, and a handful of escorts had detached themselves from the main body of the armada, while the rest of the invaders had set course for Verxis Prime. We had hoped to delay their advance at least a few days, but, in the end, communications had ceased within 2 hours, and we had gained nothing. Long-range sensors picked up what might have been continuing resistance on the surface, but by that point, we had had bigger problems to worry about. The fortuitous arrival of the Bulldog, which was, even now, in the process of scrapping the scorched remains of the Talankari fleet, had spared us the fate of our brave Voidsmen, but we were still, understandably, concerned about the lingering Talankari presence within the system. Admiral Hullet, we think there are still elements of our military fighting on our secondary world in this system, along with the remnants of the enemy fleet, I said, getting the distinct impression that the Admiral would value directness. Would you assist us in relieving our troops and driving the enemy vessels from our system? Admiral Hullet removed his hat and ran his fingers over his head, in a gesture that seemed habitual. He seemed to lose focus on us for a second, before replacing his hat and returning his piercing gaze to us. I'm sending a shuttle to pick up you and your staff, he said. There's some things we need to discuss and we'll go better face to face. Bring the military ones. Hull it out. The holofield went blank. What exactly do you think you're doing? Asked Admiral Peltazim icily. I'm trying to save our sorry hides, Admiral, I snapped. Take a look at our situation. We're defenseless, not just before the Talankari, but also these humans. Do you think, for one moment, that the Bulldog, never mind the Harpy, couldn't glass this planet at that man's whim? We need to manage the 2 titanic threats to our species' very survival, and we're not in any position to do it ourselves. If we can get one threat to eliminate another, then at least we only need to look in one direction. I finished, sternly. Appear weak. Maybe we can surprise them if we need to. Pondered General Pelaric, nodding sagely. Appear? I scoffed. General, we are weak, but if we handle this well, we might just gain an ally strong enough to let us get back on our feet. Don't imagine for a second that we will survive this if any of us manage to hack Admiral Hullet off. I glared at each of them in turn, until they had both dropped their eyes and nodded in agreement. Before long, we found ourselves strapped into mildly uncomfortable plastic seats, with our knees uncomfortably close to our heads. Our first, in-person, meeting with a human had been jarring, to say the least. Our first surprise had come when the human pilot, unable or unwilling to raise space traffic control, had simply landed in the square in front of the control center in a thunderous roar of dust and engine backwash. While we coughed and wiped dust from our eyes, a pair of humans had stomped down the thick metal boarding ramp, utterly unperturbed by the violence of their arrival. They were around a head shorter than us, and not quite as heavily built. Nothing like the hulking figures we'd expected from the attitude they exuded. Greetings, I began, addressing the larger of the 2, clad in what must be powered armor given its size and bulk. There was a polite cough from the smaller man who was looking at me meaningfully. I glanced back to the first soldier and noticed his quizzical look. High Counselor Moktelum, the smaller man inquired, politely. I am Moktelum, I said with a slight bow. These are my military advisors, Admiral Peltazim and General Pelaric. I know who they are, sir, he interrupted with an affable nod at the 2 officers. I'm Lieutenant Deacon, and this is Sergeant Bakara. Please come aboard. Sergeant Bakara will get you strapped in. Sorry for the hurry, we don't want to keep the skipper waiting, yeah? During the flight up to the Harpy, I took the time to observe the two humans in greater detail. The one called Deacon had bright blue eyes, yellowish hair, blindingly white teeth. He spoke in a rapid-fire bombardment of words to Bakara, who seemed his polar opposite. Where Deacon chattered, told what I assumed were jokes, and laughed for most of the journey, Bakara remained silent, offering only a few quiet words or a cough of laughter at a few of the jokes, quite beyond my comprehension. Forgive me, Peltazim broke into their one-sided conversation. I noticed some considerable differences between you two. Are there multiple subspecies of humans from different worlds? He asked, curiosity evident in his face. Idiot. Bakara's face darkened slightly, but Deacon waved his displeasure down and chuckled. Easy, Sergeant, he said, a note of warning in his tone. They ain't met a human before. He turned to us and continued. Nope, all one species. Though I'd say you got a ways to go before I'd call you diplomatic with a question like that. We'll give you a pass this time because you can't have known, but our differences have been a bone of contention in the past. People who look like the good sergeant haven't always gotten on so well with those that look a bit more like me. Not to worry, though, he said with a wink. Me and Baki here are best mates. Ain't that right, Sergeant? Punctuating his point with a playful punch to the bigger man's arm. Bakara merely nodded, offering a small smile to Deacon, appearing somewhat mollified. I glared at Peltazim. The rest of the trip passed awkwardly after that, and it was with great relief that I stepped from the boarding ramp into a vast hangar. In fact, I was momentarily frozen as I took in the vastness of my surroundings. Squadrons of sleek, void-black starfighters were neatly arrayed along one wall, their elegant curves and crisp lines reminding me of nothing so much as a flock of the vicious, pack-hunting Tardeltuan Gorhawks. Along the other wall crouched heavy, block-headed boarding shuttles. These spotted jutting weapons mounts, thick armor plating, and a truly monstrous plasma cutter protruding from the craft's nose. These were tended by a legion of humans who swarmed over the waiting ships. To my eyes, as we were hustled to the waiting elevator to the bridge, it seemed the most appalling chaos. Humans ran everywhere, threw smaller items to each other, narrowly avoided being crushed by passing haulers, yelled at the drivers of the haulers, and continued to run. Pelarek evidently saw something that I couldn't, because he gave a soft hoot of pleasure. Oh, they're good, he said to me, and Peltazim under his breath before continuing more loudly for the benefit of Deacon. Expecting trouble, LT? Not particularly, just basic readiness. You should see this place when we go to quarters, laughed the human happily. You present me with a problem, High Counselor, said Admiral Hullet. We were now seated around a table in the officers' mess, which had been the only deserted space available for a diplomatic conference. Technically, despite our dear Tomoyama's actions, we are not at war with the Talankari, he went on. We want to help, but even I don't have the authority to declare war on sovereign species. I began, but Hullet's raised hand stilled what would have been a heartfelt plea. Now I know that they're not going to see it that way, but as far as my chain of command will be concerned, that's neither here nor there. No act of war has been committed by either side. A private vessel was attacked and defended itself in the territory of yet another party. Can you see why I'm in a bit of a pickle? He said with a wry smile. We completely understand, Admiral, I said, my own gesture staying Peltazim's interjection. However, I know you wouldn't have called us here if you didn't have something planned which would help us, I said, a smile of my own touching my lips. You figured us out quickly, said the Admiral, now grinning. What I propose is, we offer them a truce to withdraw their remaining forces. You will, as the affected party, be there to negotiate the ceasefire between your own peoples. They'll kill us on sight, said Peltazim grimly. Talankari don't negotiate, finished Pelarek. Oh, we figured that. But once they start shooting at the Harpy, that's an act of war, and I can do what needs to be done, said Holt. Silence reigned for a moment as we considered the human's words. It's risky, said Peltazim, gifting them the first volley. The Harpy could be damaged. She could be destroyed. Harpy will be fine, Admiral. We've got a trick or two they won't be expecting, replied Hullet, tapping the side of his nose. What if they accept? I asked. Then you'll have something, you tell me, has never happened in the history of your galaxy. The Talankari will be brought to the diplomatic table, he said. You take a lot of risk on yourselves. What do you stand to gain in return? Inquired Polaric. A good question, General. Truth be told, I don't know, but something tells me it's the right thing to do. You stick around us long enough and you'll learn that a human's gut can be as good an instrument as any, particularly an old warrior like me, he added with another smile. And so, the first joint operation between our two species was a diplomatic one. We approached what was left of the Talankari fleet broadcasting the diplomatic truce codes on every frequency. The Talankari, predictably, opened fire immediately. With the shield flares still dying away, and the Harpy's own weapons busily shredding the panicking remnants of the enemy's ships, Admiral Hullet turned to me. Humanity would like to formally offer an alliance against the Talankari, he stated simply. We accept, I replied, still mildly numbed by the carnage unfolding out in the void. He nodded once. May God have mercy on our souls, he said almost to himself, seeming to deflate. He remained that way for only a moment, contemplating what we had put into motion before he steeled himself once more and roared. Marines, prepare for contested planetfall. Let's take this world back! The entire bridge howled like gust-struck wild hounds, and humans all over the ship began to chant. From the void to the ground, from the sky to the sea, from the wing to the claw, talons of the Harpy!